I'm using my friend's account because I don't want this traced back to me. I and my ex-wife Sarah have been divorced for 4 years now. We share custody of our 2 kids, Max and Lily. Our divorce wasn't exactly friendly, but we'd managed to keep things civil for the kids' sake, at least until recently. Some background. Lily was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes 2 years after our divorce. It was a scary time for all of us, but we've learned to manage it pretty well. My dad lives with me and has been absolutely invaluable in helping manage Lily's condition. He moved in shortly after her diagnosis to help out, especially during my rotating shifts as an emergency services dispatcher. The schedule can be brutal sometimes, but it pays the bills. Sarah remarried about a year ago to Dean. Dean had no kids or experience with children before meeting Sarah, but he's been increasingly involved in parenting decisions, sometimes a bit too involved, if I'm being honest. When Sarah and I divorced, I kept our modest family home to provide stability for the kids, while Sarah moved into an apartment. Now she and Dean have purchased this massive house in a neighborhood with a pool and dedicated rooms for the kids. Our custody arrangement has been stable until recently. I have the kids Wednesday through Sunday morning 1 week and Thursday through Monday morning the next. This works around my variable shift schedule and gives my dad and me plenty of time with the kids. They adore their grandpa, and he manages Lily's diabetes. Everything was going fine, or as fine as things can go with an ex, until last Thursday when I got a call from Sarah while I was at work. Her tone made me uneasy. "We need to finally settle this emergency contact situation once and for all," she said. Sarah went on to explain that Lily had experienced a diabetic episode during her weekend visit, and Dean had to wait 40 minutes for Sarah to return from her Pilates class before they could adjust Lily's insulin. She insisted that Dean's name be added to the school emergency contact list and medical authorization forms. According to her, it was ridiculous that someone who lives with the children half the time couldn't make medical decisions. I reminded her as calmly as possible about our court agreement that specified only biological parents and my father would be medical decision makers. This upset her. "Dean is their father too now, and you're just being stubborn and selfish," she snapped. Then she brought up how Dean pays for their extracurricular activities that I could never afford and suggested the kids were missing opportunities because of my pettiness. Low blow, but typical Sarah. I tried to maintain my composure, honestly trying not to lose it while at work, and explained that this wasn't about money, but about preserving my role as their father and following Lily's established care protocol that we created with her endocrinologist. Sarah wasn't having it. She interrupted me to say that Dean was more capable of handling emergencies given his flexible schedule compared to my shift work. Then she added that my reliance on my elderly father for childcare was not ideal for growing children. My dad may be in his 60s, but he's more active than most 40-year-olds I know. The conversation got worse when Sarah mentioned that Dean had already researched a new diabetes management program that would be better than the one my dad and I follow. She suggested we were behind the times on Lily's care. The call ended with Sarah threatening to take the matter back to court if I didn't stop being difficult. I felt a mixture of anger and anxiety after hanging up. To make matters worse, after the call, I discovered a series of text messages from Dean to Max, offering to take him to a professional basketball game. Sounds nice, right? Except it directly conflicts with the weekend camping trip I'd been planning with both kids for months. Max has been looking forward to it since spring. We do this trip every year, and it's one of our special traditions. This isn't the first time Dean has pulled something like this. It's actually the third time in 2 months that he's planned attractive activities that directly conflict with my scheduled time. Last month, it was tickets to a concert Max wanted to see, and before that, it was a day at an amusement park. Both times, I let the kids go because I didn't want to disappoint them, but it's starting to feel like a pattern, and an intentional one at that. I'm torn between standing my ground on the emergency contact issue and wondering if my resistance is more about my feelings toward Dean than what's best for the children. Part of me thinks I'm being reasonable. After all, my dad is literally a retired medical professional with decades of experience managing exactly these kinds of conditions. He's been helping with Lily's diabetes since her diagnosis and knows her needs inside and out. But then I start second-guessing myself, as parents always do. Is keeping Dean off the emergency contact list really what's best for Lily? What if there really is an emergency and neither Sarah nor I can be reached? But then again, my dad is almost always with the kids when they're with me, and he's more qualified than Dean to handle a medical situation. Sarah's comment about my dad being elderly affected me. He's in great health, extremely sharp, and the kids adore him. He gave up his retirement plans to help me raise them after Lily's diagnosis. The man rearranged his entire life to support us, something I'll never be able to repay him for. I feel like Dean is trying to edge me out of my kids' lives bit by bit. First, it's becoming an emergency contact. Then what? I've noticed him signing school papers as father rather than stepfather lately, and Max has started calling him Dad Dean, which makes me sad every time I hear it. I know I'm probably sounding petty and territorial. I'm trying to be self-aware here, but these are my kids. I've been there through everything, from dirty diapers to first steps to diabetes diagnosis. And now this guy who's been in their lives for barely over a year is trying to take over his role in their lives. Edit. Forgot to mention that Dean has started sending me texts with links to parenting articles about blended families and how resistance to step-parents can harm children emotionally, as if I need his advice on how to parent the kids I've raised since birth. Just another thing adding to my frustration. The worst part is feeling like I'm being painted as the bad guy. Sarah keeps saying things like, Dean just wants what's best for the kids, and you should be grateful there's another adult who cares about them. But there's a difference between caring about my kids and trying to replace me in their lives, which is what this feels like. I don't have anything against step-parents in general. I know many play crucial roles in children's lives, but there have to be boundaries, right? And medical decisions for a child with a serious condition like type 1 diabetes seem like a reasonable boundary to maintain. I keep thinking about what my lawyer told me during the divorce. Document everything. So I've started keeping track of all these incidents with Dean, scheduling over my time, Sarah's comments, undermining my parenting, and the pressure to add Dean to medical forms. I'm not sure if I'll need it, but better safe than sorry, especially if Sarah makes good on her threat to take this back to court. Am I overreacting about this whole emergency contact situation? I know co-parenting is about compromising sometimes, but this feels like it crosses a line. Thanks for reading this far. Honestly, just typing it all out has helped me process my thoughts a bit. I just don't know how to handle this without making things worse for the kids. Now for the first update. First, I want to thank everyone who commented on my original post about the situation with my ex-wife Sarah and her husband Dean. After reading through your advice, I finally got the courage to stand my ground regarding my kids' care. So it's been about 2 weeks since that phone call with Sarah about adding Dean to Lily's emergency contact list. Things have escalated, and not in a good way. The day after our argument, I got a call from a diabetes clinic asking to confirm insurance information for Lily. Apparently, Dean had tried to sign her up for a different diabetes management program without mentioning it to me. When I asked the receptionist for details, she explained that Mr. Dean had scheduled a consultation to transition Lily to their care program. I immediately called Sarah. Dean just wants what's best for Lily, she said. When I reminded her that any medical decisions needed to be agreed upon by both of us according to our custody agreement, she just sighed and said I was being difficult as usual. To make matters worse, my dad came home from Lily's school science fair. Apparently, Dean had made some comments about how my dad's medical knowledge was outdated and how modern diabetes care has evolved significantly since people of his generation practiced medicine. My dad was made to feel incompetent by a guy who got his diabetes knowledge from WebMD last year. I'm still seeing red about this, honestly. Despite all this, I agreed to discuss the emergency contact situation during our scheduled co-parenting mediation, which was set for 3 days after our initial argument. I figured a neutral third party might help us reach a reasonable compromise. The night before the mediation, I got a call from work. My coworker Jason's wife went into labor 6 weeks early, and he desperately needed someone to cover his overnight shift. I couldn't say no. This meant I'd be working all night and going straight to mediation with basically no sleep. I showed up at the mediator's office after a long 12-hour shift. Sarah and Dean were already there, matching business casual outfits. They were chatting with the mediator, Miss Porter, who commented on how refreshed the couple looked. Once we sat down, Dean made sure to mention the early business meeting he'd rescheduled to be there, emphasizing his flexibility for the children. When we finally got to the emergency contact issue, I thought I was prepared to make my case. Then Dean pulled out a folder labeled Incidents of Concern. He proceeded to present what he called documentation of times when my father allegedly mismanaged Lily's diabetes care. For those asking in the comments of my last post, yes, my dad is incredibly competent with Lily's care. No, there have been no actual incidents that put her at risk. Dean's evidence included a photo showing Lily's glucose monitoring equipment arranged differently than our usual setup. He claimed this proved we were inconsistent with her care protocol. When I explained that the photo showed my dad's temporary arrangement while cleaning the regular equipment, Mema's step-Porter asked if perhaps my father might be too elderly to keep up with modern diabetes management. Her exact words, I'm not exaggerating. Before I could properly defend my dad, Dean mentioned that he'd taken a specialized first aid course focused specifically on diabetic emergencies. He pulled out a laminated certification card and handed it to Ms. Porter. The mediator nodded approvingly. As the conversation continued, I realized what was happening. Dean hadn't just been annoying and overstepping. He'd been methodically building a case against me and my dad for months. He had documented minor variations in our care routine and was presenting them as evidence of inconsistent care while positioning himself as the concerned, capable parent figure. I'm still shocked at how calculated this was. When I tried to bring up Dean's pattern of scheduling conflicts with my custody time, Sarah quickly jumped in, saying I was being possessive of the children's time, rather than encouraging their relationships with all parental figures. Ms. Porter nodded. Seriously, was I in the twilight zone? By the end of the session, Ms. Porter suggested a compromise where Dean would be added as an emergency contact, but would contact me before making any medical decisions. This was presented as a reasonable middle ground, but it felt like a complete loss to me. Everything I said about established care protocols and my father's expertise was essentially dismissed. Many of you predicted this would happen, and you were right. The worst part came after the session. In the parking lot, Dean approached me alone while Sarah was on a phone call. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, I just want what's best for the kids. It must be hard, not being able to provide the opportunities that Sarah and I can. To answer the questions many of you asked on my last post. 1. Yes, I do think Dean is intentionally trying to replace me. 2. No, I don't have the financial resources for a lengthy legal battle. 3. Yes, I've been documenting everything since this started. That evening, Max asked if he could skip our upcoming camping trip to attend a basketball clinic that Dean had registered him for. He mentioned that Dean says it could lead to school scholarships later. I just said I'd think about it. Later that night, I was scrolling through social media and found that Sarah had been referring to themselves as a family of 4 with no mention of me. In several posts, Dean was referred to as Dad to both children. There were photos of them at various activities, most of which were scheduled during what should have been my time with the kids. I've been trying to keep it together for the kids' sake, but I'm starting to feel like I'm fighting a losing battle. Dean has the time, money, and apparently the strategic mind to position himself as the better father figure, and Sarah is fully supporting him. Meanwhile, I'm working rotating shifts, relying on my elderly father for help, and struggling to compete with the shiny opportunities they can offer. Edit for clarity. My dad is not too old to care for Lily. He's 67, in excellent health, and was literally training hospital staff on diabetes care before he retired. Dean has managed to make his age seem like a liability, which is both ageist and ridiculous. I'm taking things one day at a time, trying to figure out my next steps before the situation gets worse. I'll update if there are any significant developments, but right now, I could really use some advice on how to protect my relationship with my kids without starting an all-out war. Now for the second update. Update 2. Well, it's been almost a month since my last post about the ongoing stepfather situation, and things have gone from bad to worse. No surprise there. Thank you all for the support and advice. Even the harsh stuff has been helpful in its own way. After that mediation session I wrote about, I agreed to add Dean as an emergency contact at school. I managed to get a written stipulation that either my dad or I must be notified immediately in any emergency situation. The mediator acted like I was being given a compromise, but it still felt like I was losing ground in my own kids' lives. That camping trip I mentioned in my last post. Yeah, it never happened. Both kids ended up choosing Dean's alternatives. Max went to that basketball clinic, which just happened to be scheduled on the exact weekend of our trip. Lily decided she wanted to go to a day camp that Dean found, which included horseback riding lessons, something she's been asking for that I can't afford on my dispatcher salary. I tried not to show how I was and told them we'd reschedule. Their excitement about Dean's alternatives made it clear where they'd rather be, though. My dad has been different around the kids lately. He's always checking Lily's glucose readings and documenting everything. When I asked him about it, he admitted he's afraid of making mistakes because Dean is waiting to criticize any errors. Dad's been managing diabetic patients for 4 decades, but now he second guesses himself. It breaks my heart seeing him like this and makes me want to punch Dean, if I'm being honest. I've started keeping my own records of all of Dean's helpful interventions. Over the past 2 months, I've documented 17 separate occasions where he's made decisions or arrangements that affect my kids without consulting me first. Everything from signing Max up for private basketball coaching to changing Lily's diabetic snack routine. Nothing individually seems worth fighting over, but together, it's a clear pattern of him inserting himself into every parenting decision. Things reached a breaking point last week. I showed up at Sarah's to pick up the kids on Thursday, my regular pickup day according to our agreement. I found out Sarah was on a business trip to Chicago and Dean was alone with the kids. Nobody had informed me that someone other than Sarah would be staying overnight with my children, which is required in our custody agreement. As I was helping Lily gather her things, I asked about her week. She mentioned seeing a doctor. When I asked more questions, Dean appeared in the kitchen doorway. She wasn't feeling well over the weekend, and with Sarah out of town, I took her to see someone, he explained. You took her to a doctor without telling me? It was just a checkup, he said. The new endocrinologist suggested some adjustments to her insulin regimen, which I've already implemented. She's been doing much better. I nearly lost it right there. New endocrinologist? What happened to Dr. Wilson? Dr. Wilson has been managing Lily's diabetes since her diagnosis and knows her case thoroughly. This new doctor is more up-to-date on juvenile diabetes management, Dean said. His office is also closer to our home and better covered by our insurance. The way he emphasized "our" made it clear he wasn't including me in that category. I asked to see the doctor's notes, trying to keep my voice level. Dean hesitated before retrieving some paperwork. One look at the appointment details showed this wasn't an emergency visit. It had been scheduled 2 weeks earlier. This was a deliberate move to switch Lily's care provider without consulting me. I noticed Max watching our exchange. For his sake, I swallowed the things I wanted to say and asked, why would you change her medical provider without consulting me, or at least waiting for Sarah to return? I was just trying to help, he said. I thought you'd appreciate someone taking the burden off your father. Your work schedule makes you less available for these things, and I have the flexibility to take her to appointments during regular hours. Lily started crying then, and he immediately suggested we continue this conversation another time when the children aren't present. Like I was the one causing a scene. The drive home was tense. Lily admitted she was confused by the new doctor and didn't understand why they were changing things, but she didn't want to upset Dean by saying anything. Max didn't speak the entire ride. Later that evening, I overheard him telling my dad that he wishes everyone would just get along. That comment kept me up most of the night, wondering if I'm handling this all wrong. Am I the one making this difficult for my kids? It's exactly what Sarah and Dean want me to think, and sometimes I can't help but wonder if they're right. I called my attorney first thing the next morning. He wasn't encouraging. While Dean's actions technically violated our custody agreement, courts generally favor collaborative co-parenting these days. He explained that judges often see resistance to step-parents as a red flag and might view my complaints as me being uncooperative rather than Dean overstepping. Unless I can prove actual harm to the children, I don't have much legal recourse. Might as well tell me to just hand over my kids at this point. That night, I got an email from Sarah, who had returned from her trip. She accused me of creating a scene at pickup and claimed my jealousy of Dean was harmful to the children. The kicker came at the end, where she suggested that if I couldn't accept Dean's role in the children's lives, they might need to revisit our current custody arrangement. Translation: get in line or we'll take the kids. Edit: quick update. I just got off the phone with Lily's original endocrinologist, Dr. Wilson. When I explained the situation, she was concerned about Lily changing treatment protocols. She's sending me documentation about the risks of inconsistent diabetes management in children, which I'm forwarding to both Sarah and the mediator. At least one medical professional is on my side. I'm trying to focus on what's best for my kids, while not being pushed out of their lives. They have the nicer house, the money for activities, 2 parents who are always available, and now they're taking over medical decisions too. I feel like I'm being erased from my own children's lives. More updates to come, unfortunately. Now for the final update. Final update. The custody battle is over, and you won't believe how it ended. First of all, thank you to everyone who's been following this nightmare saga with my ex. Your support and advice got me through some really dark days, especially those of you who told me to document everything. You literally saved my family. It's been about 3 weeks since my last update. After that incident with Dean taking Lily to a new endocrinologist, things got worse real quick. Just 2 days after my last post, I was served with official paperwork. Sarah was filing for a custody modification, seeking primary physical custody of both kids. The petition cited my resistance to collaborative co-parenting and outdated care practices as the main reasons. Yeah, apparently following the care plan created by Lily's actual doctor is outdated now. The timing couldn't have been worse. My dad came down with pneumonia and was hospitalized for 9 days. Pneumonia is no joke. Max and Lily were really upset about Grandpa being sick. They're super close to him. I had to scramble to find qualified help with Lily's diabetes management during my shifts. I ended up hiring a certified diabetes care specialist at $35 hour, which absolutely destroyed my savings, worth every penny, but still. Of course, Sarah and Dean immediately used Dad's illness. Their lawyer sent mine a smug email highlighting how this proves the fragility of your client's childcare arrangements and demonstrated why a more stable household environment would benefit the children. I wanted to reply with where exactly they could stick that email, but my lawyer advised against it. Meanwhile, Dean ramped up his campaign to replace me. The school principal called to confirm whether Dean had authorization to access the kids' records after he showed up requesting copies of their academic files. During parent-teacher conferences, he introduced himself to Lily's new math teacher as Lily's dad, without clarifying he was her stepfather. He even started signing school permission slips as parent rather than step-parent. The most painful blow came when Max let slip that Dean had been telling them the custody change would let them have a normal family life and not have to pack bags every few days. According to Max, Dean said I could visit whenever I want, once the new arrangement was in place. Despite all this, I kept my head down and followed my attorney's advice. I documented everything, every schedule change, every medical decision, every instance of Dean overstepping. I saved texts, emails, voicemails, all of it. I even asked my dad's nurse to document how often Sarah and Dean visited him in the hospital. Spoiler alert, exactly 0 times. The custody hearing was scheduled for last Thursday. I barely slept the night before, terrified of losing my kids. I showed up in my one decent suit, which I last wore to a cousin's wedding 3 years ago and was definitely a bit tight now. Sarah and Dean were already there, huddled with their expensive-looking attorney. When proceedings began, Sarah's lawyer presented their case first. He presented them as stable, flexible work schedules, spacious home, financial resources for the best educational and medical care. He emphasized how much the kids enjoyed their numerous enrichment activities that Dean had arranged. Then he brought up my dad's hospitalization as evidence of my precarious childcare situation and questioned whether my rigid adherence to outdated medical protocols was in Lily's best interest. By the time my attorney's turn came, my lawyer began methodically presenting the evidence we'd gathered. 32 documented instances where Dean made parental decisions without consulting me, text messages showing how Dean repeatedly scheduled activities during my custody time, and most importantly, medical records demonstrating Lily's stable A1C levels under our care. The judge's expression changed noticeably when my attorney showed screenshots of social media posts where Sarah referred to themselves as a family of 4 with no mention of me. My lawyer played an audio recording from 2 weeks ago. It was Dean talking to Lily after she had a minor low blood sugar episode. His exact words, "See, This is why things would be better if you lived with us full-time. These problems wouldn't happen if your care was consistent. Your dad tries his best, but he just doesn't understand your condition like I do." Thank God Max recorded this on his phone. That kid is smarter than I was at 12. Sarah clearly had no idea Dean had said this to Lily. Dean couldn't even look at the judge when asked to explain his comments. Their lawyer attempted to dismiss it as taken out of context, but the damage was done. A detailed letter from Dr. Wilson, Lily's original endocrinologist, stated that our care plan was medically appropriate and that changing physicians and treatment protocols without consultation between legal guardians was potentially dangerous and destabilizing for the patient. She also included data showing that Lily's diabetes had been well managed under our existing care plan. The judge denied Sarah's request for custody modification. Not only that, he issued a stern warning about parental alienation, specifically directing that Dean is not to make unilateral medical decisions or represent himself as the children's father in educational or medical settings. He ordered us all into co-parenting counseling, and mandated that any changes to the kids' medical care must have written approval from both Sarah and me. Here's the part I never expected. As we were leaving the courthouse, Sarah asked if we could talk privately. Once Dean was not nearby, she looked genuinely shaken. "I didn't know he was saying those things to Lily," she said, "and I didn't know about most of what you presented today." She admitted Dean had been handling most of the communication about the kids lately and filtering what he told her. We met for coffee the next day, just the two of us, and had our first real conversation in years. She broke down crying, admitting she had been influenced by Dean's idea for their perfect family and lost sight of what was best for the kids. She promised to be more involved directly and to stop letting Dean take over. The most surprising part? She's the one who suggested revising our agreement to explicitly list my dad as an approved medical decision-maker, acknowledging his expertise has been beneficial for Lily's care. I'm not naive enough to think everything's fixed, but things have improved. The kids came over yesterday, and for the first time in months, they seemed relaxed. Max even asked about rescheduling that camping trip for next month. Dad's back home now, recovering. Lily has been helping him organize his medications, which is pretty adorable. And last night, she showed me a new glucose monitoring app she likes better than the one Dean downloaded for her. "This one lets me share data with you and Grandpa and Mom," she explained, "so everyone knows what's happening." Smart kid. Edit. Forgot to mention that Dean actually tried to approach me in the courthouse parking lot after Sarah went back inside. He started with some BS about hoping we can all move forward positively, but I just walked away. I've learned that engaging with him directly never leads anywhere productive. The co-parenting counselor can mediate our communications from now on. Life after almost losing my kids to Dean's manipulation is still complicated, but I'm sleeping better knowing the judge saw through his act. I'm focusing on rebuilding some of the confidence my kids lost during this ordeal and showing them that our family, messy and non-traditional as it may be, is still worth fighting for.